Welcome back, Munchies, to Chapter 7 of the Howl of the Forsaken. If you enjoy the story so far, subscribe, comment, and hit that like button. It really helps my fledgling channel. An incessant ding cut through the fog of Kael's sleep. He groaned, rubbing his eyes. Was it morning already? No, unacceptable. He wasn't a morning person. Hell, he was barely an afternoon person. Anyone who dared to speak to him before sunrise deserved to be punched in the face. He shifted. His arms grazed against what felt like silk. That couldn't be right. His bed was usually about as forgiving as a pile of bricks in a burlap sack, and his sheets could peel the skin off his bones on a bad day. His mattress left his spine feeling like a poorly stacked game of Jenga most of the time. Soft and silky? What the hell? His eyes snapped open, and what greeted him wasn't the cracked ceiling of his depressing excuse for a room, but the obsidian wall with a soft blue line of light glowing across its surface. Kael bolted upright in the bed, his heart hammering in his chest. He scanned the room and sighed. It was still here. The chamber, the forge, and the damn fancy AI. It wasn't a dream he had cooked up after nearly dying at the grip of a ravenous man-eating plant. The Khan's watch gleamed from his wrist, catching the glow of the wall's light as if it were proud to exist. His heart still thumped. Apparently, it hadn't gotten the memo that he wasn't panicking, he was just surprised. So this is real after all. For the first time in a long, long time, Kael didn't feel like a cautionary tale, one of many who had been forgotten in the sands of time. He wasn't just the broken kid who'd been scraping by since 13. Now, he had a future and the terrifying possibility of hope. But first, hygiene. He sniffed himself and immediately regretted it. His nose wrinkled. He'd slept in those sheets, filthy as a swamp creature. Just then, his gaze drifted to a pair of doors he hadn't noticed the night before. They were seamlessly integrated into the obsidian walls, damn near invisible unless you were really looking. He got to his feet, stretching out muscles that still felt a bit bruised from his so-called evolution. Walking over to the wall near the fireplace, Kael reached out and ran his fingers along the icy surface. There were faint lines cut into the stone. As soon as his fingers made contact, a pulse of blue light rippled across the wall. With a low hiss and a quiet click, a section of the wall depressed an inch. Then it slid open with the elegance of a secret lair entrance, because, clearly, this place wasn't done being dramatic. Behind it was a walk-in closet, fancy in a you'll grow into it kind of way. 3 pairs of clothing hung neatly inside, exact replicas of what he'd worn before, but without the grime or evidence of multiple near-death experiences. They were clearly new, never touched by any hand. Kael arched a brow. Well, at least the forge has a fashion department, he muttered. Nice to know it's committed to the aesthetic of gritty post-apocalypse chic. He stepped into the closet, brushing his hand along the fabric. The outfits were durable and comfortable, unlike the junk he usually wore, which was scratchy. Okay, this is getting weird. Useful, but weird, and yet, he couldn't help smirk a bit. Just maybe, things weren't as hopeless as they used to be. With a fresh outfit in hand, Kael padded across the sleek floor toward the bathroom he'd barely noticed last night in his adrenaline-fueled haze. The familiar obsidian walls greeted him again. Blue glowing swirls ran along the stone. To his right, a massive mirror stretched across the wall, tall enough to reflect a giant's existential crisis. Beneath it, a floating counter hovered, housing not 1, not 2, but 4 basins. 4? Why the hell are there 4 sinks? Was the forge expecting roommates? Guests? A small army? Kael shook his head. Nah, that was a problem for future Kael. Or never Kael, definitely not present Kael. At the far end of the room, a couple of polished black steps led down into what could only be described as a splash pool for royalty. It was absurdly big, easily twice the size of any bath he'd seen in person, and he'd broken into a senator's estate once. Looks like one of those flex tubs the rich asshats in Soccer City show off on the Arcnet, he thought with a bitter scoff. Look at me, peasant. I soak in imported spring water while you wash your socks in recycled drain juice. Kael rolled his eyes and muttered, all that money, and they still smell like turds drenched in overpriced cologne squished out of the ass of a rock turtle. He set his clothes on a bench beside the tub, real wood, by the way. Just as he turned toward the water, a chime echoed through the room. A panel in the wall hissed open, and water surged out in a smooth cascade, flowing into the tub with unnatural speed. Within seconds, steam rose, curling through the air, beckoning him forward. Kael shivered, surprised by the sensation touching across his skin. When was the last time I had hot water to shower in? He mused. Hell, when was the last time I didn't have to sprint through a half-broken public washroom while hoping the rinse cycle didn't start with ice water and end with me getting a migraine? Now he could bathe for as long as he wanted. He could soak like one of those fancy bastards. Without ceremony, Kael peeled off his dirty clothes. A slight draft of air reminded him that modesty was for people with company and shame. He had neither. He stepped into the bath and groaned. It was one of those whole-body groans that you made when you didn't know how tight your muscles were until they melted into hot water and decided they didn't hate you anymore. He sank lower, letting the warmth lap over him, curling around every bruise and scar like a lover's kiss. This is actually illegal, he muttered, eyes fluttering closed. Too good, must be a trap. The water stopped flowing as if it had heard him. Silence descended as the bath water reached the right level, except for the gentle lapping of water and his own breathing. Then, sniff, he caught it, a faint scent in the steam. Rose and lemon, not overpowering like the cheap sanitizers the city used, which smelled like citrus death. Scented, it's scented. He looked around suspiciously. What's next? A back massage from a robotic butler? But deep down, as the heat soaked into his bones and the scent filled his lungs, Kael relaxed. A small break brought to you by The Sassy Scribe. Join me on my Patreon page for more LGBTQ+ fiction books. And now for the rest of the chapter. An hour later, Kael emerged from the bathroom, cleaner than he'd been in years, maybe cleaner than he'd ever been. He felt like a fraud, honestly. A mutt dressed in noble fur, waiting for someone to realize he didn't belong. Living in Ashgard Reach meant filth was part of your daily wardrobe. Just breathing the air for too long could coat your lips in grime and your lungs in an early grave. The slums weren't made for clean freaks. Anyone with OCD probably jumped off a rooftop by week 2. Kael's new clothes fit him comfortably. The fabric was soft, not scratchy or threadbare like the rags he usually wore. And there were no suspicious holes in embarrassing places, either. Still, Kael eyed the stitching with skepticism. Things this nice didn't last in his world. Nothing ever did. He couldn't afford armor, never had. Professional-grade gear was for hunters with sponsors, silver spoon brats with licenses, or rich bastards who could pay fools to fight their battles. Rift dungeons were suicide for the under-equipped. He wasn't lucky or reckless enough to go artifact hunting, until now. Now he had a forge. His forge. Kael walked toward the Chamber of Echoes, his eyes scanning the obsidian hallways with curiosity. The space felt less haunting than before. It was less like a tomb and more like a dormant beast, still dangerous, but oddly familiar, possibly even comforting. Or maybe his near-death experience had just numbed his fear response. It was hard to tell. He approached the beat-up red backpack he'd flung aside yesterday. It had served him well over the years, but the seams of the bag were barely hanging on, like his patience on a bad day. He tugged at the zipper, which got stuck halfway. With a grunt, he yanked harder. "Rip, seriously?" he muttered, holding up the torn fabric. The bag had ripped clean in half, guts spilling out across the workbench. Kael stared at it for a second, blinking. Then, wait, I'm stronger. The realization clicked in his mind. His grip strength wasn't normal anymore for a hybrid. His entire body thrummed with power now. He wasn't the same scrawny survivor who had to run from Vex mice. A slow grin crept across his face. "Hell yeah," he whispered. "I might actually survive the week." His eyes roamed the cluttered mess of ingredients and creature cores. Loot he'd scraped together from years of scavenging. Infernal imps, marsh wolves, Vex mice, bottom-tier monsters, creatures that died easily and didn't bite back too hard and fed your pride just enough to keep you breathing. But now he could go for Riftspawn with teeth, a creature similar to the Berserker bear, which could kill you in seconds. He could finally reap creatures not just for survival, but for leveling up. A low, traitorous growl from his stomach shattered his heroic inner monologue. Kael sighed and snatched the last 3 protein bars from the wreckage of the bag. Maybe the forge could make armor, but unless it could whip up a gourmet meal from thin air, he was stuck with these bricks of chemical despair. He tore one open and bit down. Bleg, the taste was as bad as ever, artificial chocolate trying to pretend it wasn't sweetened cardboard. His lichen senses made it worse. Where humans tasted mild cocoa flavor, he tasted all the artificial chemicals and sweeteners. He chewed anyway, because hunger beat taste, and he wasn't rich enough to eat like a decent human being. "Bon appetit, jackass," he muttered to himself, heading toward the forge with a protein bar in hand. Kael stood in front of the gigantic forge, its pale blue fire swirling into the air. The heat radiated outward, comforting, almost maternal in the way it enveloped him. The warmth soaked into his bones, banishing the cold that had lingered there for years. For once, his body didn't ache from exhaustion or hunger. It was just peaceful, as if the world's problems couldn't reach him and drag him out into the cold again, lost and forgotten. He narrowed his eyes, curiosity twitching like an itch in the back of his skull. This forge wasn't just a relic, it was a living machine. Who the hell built this thing? Eva, Kael called out, tearing his gaze from the dancing flames. A shimmer of light flickered behind him. The blonde AI appeared with her usual poise, stopping neatly beside him. "Good morning, Kael," she greeted politely. "What can I do for you?" Kael tilted his head, crossing his arms while taking another bite from the protein bar. "Tell me about your people. What happened to the architects? As far as we know, they vanished overnight. No goodbye letters, just ruins." Eva turned toward the forge, her golden hair catching the light. For a moment, she didn't respond. Her eyes, more expressive than those of many people Kael had met, held a flicker of something unspoken. Was it sorrow? Regret? He was impressed by how convincing she was. Damn personality imprints. Finally, she spoke. "We were fools," she said, "tinkering with forces we didn't understand, at least, not fully. At first, it was out of curiosity, then ambition, and ultimately arrogance. We believed our mastery of magic made us untouchable." Kael snorted, "Classic." Eva ignored him and continued, "We bent the laws of reality to our will. Our magisters delved into deeper magic, interdimensional contact, soul-binding rituals, and rift manipulation. It was progress, or so we thought. We weren't alone in the cosmos, and we wanted to know who else was out there." Kael could already see where this was going. "Let me guess. A door gets kicked open, and guess who comes calling? Hell's finest." She gave a small nod. "Not all the beings we contacted were hostile, some were benevolent. However, others viewed us as prey. We reached out to the demonic realms in hopes of making a bargain. Some of our magisters entered into contracts. At first, it was subtle, a whisper here, a temptation there. But demons are patient." Her voice darkened. "They didn't come in with fire and fury. Instead, they influenced us, twisting the hearts of our scholars. They turned knowledge into greed and progress into a lust for power." Kael grimaced. He knew a thing or two about corruption. It never started with a battle cry and bloodshed. It started with wanting more and more, with no end in sight. Eventually, the Magister Lords, our ruling council, began to turn against one another, Eva continued. Each one sought supremacy, backed by their infernal allies. The war shattered our society. Cities were reduced to ashes, and the demons betrayed their summoners, slaughtering them once they were no longer useful. Kael's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. The apocalypse came next." Eva nodded solemnly. "The calamity from 4 centuries ago was not the first demon incursion, only the most recent. The last remnants of our people, those who hadn't lost their souls, used the primordial forges to seal the rifts again. They sacrificed everything to stop the world from falling. And then what?" Kael asked. "They just walked off into the sunset?" "No," Eva said, her gaze still fixed on the fire. "They buried their shame beneath stone and silence. The last architects scattered, blending into the common bloodlines, hiding what they were. Hiding what they'd done." Kael's eyes lingered on the forge's fire, allowing her cautionary tale to sink into his brain. The flames danced in silence, casting shadows across the chamber walls. So, that's how it ended. The great and powerful architects had almost doomed the world through their arrogance, and then vanished, leaving behind their elaborate creations in ruins. He shook his head. It seemed humanity, no matter how brilliant, always fell on its own sword in the end. Sounded about right. Still, Kael looked down at his hands. He had one of those toys now, and maybe, just maybe, he could do better. "Hell of a legacy," he muttered. Eva didn't answer. She didn't need to. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you on the next chapter. Until then, have a great week. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like. Thanks again.